Victor Salazar was not born into comfort. He was born into struggle. He grew up in a tiny, crumbling apartment on the rough side of the city. The walls were thin, the winters were bitter cold, and the kitchen was almost always empty. But Victor did not complain. He worked. Every single day, he worked. He got his first job at 14, washing dishes at a late-night diner. The hours were long. His hands would crack and bleed in the cold water, but every coin he earned, he saved. Every bill he collected, he put in a small tin box under his bed. By the time he was 20, Victor had saved just enough to start a small courier business. It was nothing fancy, just a beat-up bicycle, a bag strapped to his back, and a burning desire to be more than what the world said he was. People laughed at him, neighbors whispered behind his back, some even told him to give up. "You were born poor, Victor," one man told him. "You will die poor too." But Victor did not listen to them. He listened to the fire inside his chest instead. He worked harder than anyone around him. He saved more than he spent. He learned everything he could about business, money, and opportunity. And slowly, very slowly, things began to change. His courier business grew. Then he expanded into logistics, then into real estate, then into technology. One successful move led to another. One smart decision opened a door to 10 more. Decades passed, and the boy who once washed dishes for coins became one of the wealthiest men the world had ever seen. Not a millionaire, not a billionaire, a trillionaire. A man whose name appeared in global financial reports and whose companies stretched across 5 continents. But wealth did not change Victor Salazar the way it changes most men. He still lived simply at heart. He still believed that a person's true value was not found in their bank account, but in the way they treated others, especially those who had nothing. He married a quiet, kind woman named Rosa early in his years of struggle. Rosa was gentle and warm. She believed in Victor even when he did not believe in himself. Together, they had one son, a boy they named Marco. Marco was the center of their world. Victor worked long hours and sacrificed many comforts, but everything he did for Marco. He wanted his son to have opportunities he never had. He wanted him to grow up knowing love, safety, and purpose. But life does not always stay gentle. When Marco was just 7 years old, Rosa was diagnosed with a serious illness. Victor spent every resource he had trying to get her the best care in the world. But despite everything, Rosa passed away one quiet evening, holding Victor's hand. The loss shattered him. Victor sat beside Rosa's bed for a long time after she was gone. He held her hand even when it had gone cold. He could not cry right away. The pain was too deep for tears. Then he heard a small voice at the door. It was Marco, his little face confused and frightened. "Papa, is Mama sleeping?" he asked. Victor looked at his son, and in that moment, something locked into place inside him. He could not fall apart. Not now, not with this small boy looking at him for strength. "Come here, my son," Victor said softly, opening his arms. Marco ran to him, and Victor held him close and made a silent promise that he would be enough, that he would be both mother and father, that Marco would never feel alone in this world as long as Victor had breath in his body. And Victor kept that promise. He raised Marco with love and discipline in equal measure. He taught him to work hard, to be humble, and to never look down on anyone, no matter how much wealth he one day inherited. He sent Marco to the best schools. He spent weekends helping him with homework. He was at every school performance, every important moment. The wealth kept growing in the background, but to Victor, none of it mattered more than the young man Marco was becoming. Marco Salazar grew up knowing his father's story well. He knew about the crumbling apartment, the tin box of coins, the cracked hands, and the bicycle courier days. Victor made sure Marco knew all of it, not to make him feel guilty, but to make him understand where they had come from and what it truly meant to have everything. Marco took those lessons seriously. He studied with intense focus. He graduated at the top of his class from one of the world's most respected universities, and instead of simply inheriting his father's empire, Marco decided to build something of his own first. He launched a technology company from a small rented office with 4 employees. Within 3 years, it had grown into a global powerhouse. His instincts were sharp, his leadership was calm but strong, and the people who worked for him respected him deeply. Now, at 32, Marco Salazar was tall, confident, and undeniably successful. He moved through the world with the ease of a man who had worked hard for everything he had and knew exactly what he was worth. And naturally, women noticed. Wherever Marco went, business events, charity galas, social gatherings, women were drawn to him. Some were genuinely kind, but many, Victor had noticed with growing unease, seemed to be more interested in Marco's name and his fortune than in the man himself. Victor watched all of this quietly from a distance. He did not interfere. He trusted his son, but he worried. He knew better than most people what greed looked like, dressed in pretty clothes and a charming smile. He had built an empire. He had seen the very worst of human behavior. He knew what people were capable of when money was involved. So when Marco came home one afternoon with news that Victor's heart dropped, he was not completely surprised, but he was deeply afraid. "Papa," Marco said, sitting across from him with a wide grin, "I have someone I want to tell you about. Her name is Valentina Voss. We've been together for several months. She's incredible, smart, stunning, and full of life. I think she's the one, Papa. I think I'm going to ask her to marry me." Victor looked at his son carefully. He saw the glow in his eyes. He had not seen that glow since Rosa was alive. "Why haven't you brought her to meet me yet?" Victor asked quietly. Marco shifted slightly. "She's been traveling a lot. She runs her own fashion label. Her schedule is very demanding. But I promise, very soon." Victor nodded, but a cold, familiar unease settled in his chest. He didn't know Valentina Voss yet, but something about the way Marco described her, so perfect, so polished, so sophisticated, made Victor want to look more closely before this went any further. That night, Victor sat alone in his study. The city lights flickered below through the tall windows. He poured himself a small glass of water and thought for a long time. He thought about Rosa, about how she had loved him when he had nothing, about how she had never once cared about money or status. She loved him, just him. "Marco deserves that kind of love," Victor whispered to himself. "He deserves someone who sees him, not his fortune." And slowly, a plan began to form in his mind. Before the plan could begin, something happened that Victor had not expected. One evening, Victor decided to take a quiet walk through an older part of the city. He liked to do this sometimes. Put on simple clothes, leave the security team behind, and walk among ordinary people. It reminded him of who he truly was beneath all the wealth. He had stopped at a small street stall to buy a warm drink when he noticed the sky beginning to darken. He picked up his pace toward the parking area where his private car was waiting. But he never made it there. Two young men stepped out from a narrow alley. They were big. Their eyes were cold. One of them grabbed Victor's arm before he could react. "Hand over the watch and the wallet," the taller one growled, tightening his grip. Victor's heart hammered. He was 70 years old. He had no security with him. His phone was in his jacket pocket, but he could not reach it. "Please," Victor said steadily. "I'm an old man. I have nothing of great value on me tonight." The men did not believe him. The taller one shoved him hard against the wall. And then, a voice cut through the night like a blade. "Hey, get away from him right now!" Everyone froze. The two attackers turned. Standing a few meters away was a young woman. She was not especially tall. She was simply dressed, but she stood like someone who was not afraid at all. In one hand, she held her phone, flashlight blazing directly at the attackers. In the other hand, she held a small personal alarm, finger already on the button. "I've already started a recording," she said, her voice firm and clear. "And I will press this alarm, and your faces will be on every camera on this street. So I suggest you walk away right now." There was a long, tense moment. The two men looked at each other. Then they looked back at the young woman, who did not move an inch. They turned and disappeared into the dark. Victor exhaled slowly. He turned to the young woman with wide eyes. "My goodness, you saved me. You weren't afraid at all." The young woman walked quickly to his side and placed a steady hand on his arm. "Are you all right, sir? Did they hurt you? Let me look at your arm. I saw him grab you hard." She was gentle and careful as she checked his wrist. Her eyes were full of genuine concern. Not curiosity, not drama, just real, simple care. "I'm fine, my dear," Victor said. "A little shaken, but fine. I owe you more than I can say." "You owe me nothing," she said with a warm smile. "I'm just glad I was passing by. My name is Nadia Reyes. Do you have someone to call? I can walk with you to wherever you're going." And she did exactly that. She walked beside him all the way to where his car was parked, making quiet conversation, making sure he was calm, checking twice that he was truly okay before she said goodnight. Victor watched her go. He stood there for a moment, not moving. He had met thousands of people in his lifetime, powerful people, brilliant people, charming people, but there was something about this young woman that was completely different. She had helped a stranger in the dark with no hesitation and no reward. She had not even asked his name. The next morning, Victor made a quiet inquiry through one of his trusted assistants. Just a name, Nadia Reyes. Within hours, he had a picture forming. Nadia Reyes was 28 years old. She came from a working-class family. She had put herself through university by working 2 jobs. She was currently employed as a senior executive assistant at Marco's technology company, one of the most demanding roles in the entire organization, and she handled it with a reputation for being organized, discreet, and deeply professional. Her colleagues spoke of her with admiration. Her neighbors spoke of her with warmth. She volunteered at a community center on weekends. She sent money home to help her parents every month without fail. Victor sat back in his chair after reading the report. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he called Marco. "Marco," he said, "tell me more about your assistant, the one named Nadia." There was a pause on the other end. "Nadia? She's exceptional, Papa. She keeps the entire office running. I honestly don't know what I'd do without her. But why are you asking?" "Just curious. Has she ever asked you for special favors? For promotions? For gifts?" "Never," Marco said immediately, sounding almost surprised by the question. "Nadia is the least demanding person in my entire company.
She does her job brilliantly, and she never asks for anything beyond her salary. She's genuinely good, Papa. A genuinely good person." Victor smiled slowly to himself. "Good," he said. "That's good to know." After the call ended, Victor sat quietly with his thoughts. He thought about Marco, who was about to propose to a woman he had never even introduced to his father. He thought about Valentina Voss, the polished fashion designer with the perfect image. And he thought about Nadia Reyes, the young woman who had walked a stranger to safety in the dark and then disappeared without asking for anything in return. The plan that had been forming in his mind grew sharper, more defined. It was time to act.
The next time Victor visited Marco at his mansion, he waited until after dinner to bring it up. They were sitting in the large living room. The fire was low and warm. Marco was relaxed, scrolling through something on his phone. Victor set down his cup of tea and looked at his son carefully. "Marco," he said, "I need to talk to you about Valentina." Marco looked up, his expression cautious. "What about her?" "You love her," Victor said. "I can see that, and I don't doubt that you believe she is the right woman. But Marco, I need to know who she really is before you put a ring on her finger. Not the version she shows the world, the real version." Marco frowned. "Papa, you haven't even met her yet. How can you have concerns?" "Because I have lived a long time," Victor said gently, "and I have seen what happens when a man with great wealth chooses a partner based only on what he sees on the surface. I've watched people be destroyed by it. I don't want that for you." Marco was quiet. He could not argue with that. He had seen it happen to others too. "What are you proposing?" Marco asked finally. Victor leaned forward. "I want to move into your home. Not as your father, as a security guard. I will use a different name. The household staff will be told to keep my identity secret, and we will observe how Valentina treats me, a man she believes has no power, no money, and no importance." "Papa," Marco said slowly, his eyes widening, "are you serious?" "Completely serious," Victor replied. "But you're 70 years old and you can't—" "I am 70 years old and I walked alone through the city last week and survived 2 muggers," Victor said with a calm smile. "I think I can manage standing at a gate." Marco stared at his father for a long moment. Then he sighed deeply and rubbed his face with both hands. "Fine," he said at last. "If it gives you peace of mind, Papa. But I'm telling you, you will see that I'm right about Valentina, and when you do, I expect a full apology." Victor smiled. "If you're right, you will have it. But if I'm right—" "You're not," Marco said firmly. Victor said nothing more. He simply picked up his tea and took a slow, steady sip. 3 days later, Victor Salazar, one of the most powerful men alive, packed a modest bag, put on a plain gray security uniform, and reported for duty at his son's front gate. His name, for all purposes, was now Victor Ruiz, the new security guard. Old, quiet, forgettable. Valentina Voss arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. She came in a sleek black car with tinted windows. The driver stepped out and opened the door for her, and she emerged in a cloud of expensive perfume and designer fashion. Her clothing was flawless, her hair was perfect, her jewelry caught the afternoon light. She was, without question, beautiful. Marco had told her he wanted her to spend more time at the mansion while they finalized details for their upcoming engagement announcement. Valentina had agreed with a bright smile and 3 pieces of matching luggage. Victor was standing at the front gate when she arrived. He moved to open it promptly, stepping back respectfully as the car rolled through. Valentina did not look at him, not even a glance. He might as well have been part of the gate itself. Inside, Marco greeted her warmly. He introduced Victor briefly. "That's Victor, our new security guard. He'll be managing the gate and the grounds." Valentina glanced in Victor's direction for the first time. Her eyes passed over him the way eyes pass over furniture, registering it exists, assigning it no further thought. She gave a small, detached nod, then turned back to Marco. Victor said nothing. He returned to his post, but he had noted everything. In the days that followed, a pattern emerged. Valentina spoke to the household staff the way a general speaks to soldiers, with no warmth, only commands. "Bring this. Take that. Why is this not done yet?" She never said please, she almost never said thank you. And if something was not done exactly as she wanted, she would sigh loudly and make sure the person knew they had disappointed her. With Victor, it was even colder. When she needed the gate opened for one of her many deliveries, she would call out from inside her car without ever rolling down the window completely, "Security, gate, now," as though words cost her something she couldn't spare. When Victor once attempted a polite greeting, "Good morning, Miss Valentina, I hope you slept well," she had looked at him briefly, then said, "Yes, make sure no one parks in front of the west entrance today. I'm expecting my stylist," and she walked inside. Victor absorbed it all. He remained calm. He remained respectful. He did his job without complaint. But he was watching, and he was remembering every single thing. One evening, Marco decided to escalate the test. He had agreed to it, and he intended to do it properly, even if part of him still believed it was unnecessary. At dinner, with Valentina present, Marco suddenly raised his voice at Victor, who was standing quietly near the entrance to the dining room. "Victor," Marco said sharply, his tone harder than usual, "I told you this morning that I did not want any vendors admitted to the property without prior approval. The florist came in today without my permission. Why was that allowed?" Victor bowed his head. "I apologize, sir. The florist said she had standing approval from last month. I should have double-checked. It won't happen again." Marco maintained the severity of his expression. "See that it doesn't." There was silence at the table. Valentina had watched the entire exchange with an expression that was perfectly calm. She reached for her wine glass and took a slow, elegant sip. After Victor had stepped away, Marco turned to her. "Was I too hard on him?" Valentina tilted her head lightly. "He made a mistake. You addressed it. That's what you're supposed to do." She set her glass down. "You shouldn't feel bad about holding staff accountable, Marco. If you're too soft with them, they'll walk all over you." Marco said nothing, but inside, something shifted quietly. That night, he went to check on Victor in the small security room near the side entrance. Victor was sitting on a plain chair, drinking a cup of tea from a thermos. "Papa," said Marco, quietly, closing the door behind him. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Victor said. "What did you think of her response?" Victor looked at his son steadily. "She didn't say I should have been treated better. She didn't say you were too harsh. She said you were right to correct me. Staff accountability." He let the words sit in the air between them. "She didn't see a person, Marco. She saw a problem that needed managing." Marco was quiet for a long time. "She might just be practical," he said at last. "Perhaps," Victor said. He picked up his thermos. "But let's keep watching." He was ready. As the days continued, Valentina's behavior around Victor became less guarded. In the beginning, she had simply ignored him. That, in its own way, was telling. But as she grew more comfortable in the mansion, the coldness she reserved for the staff began to take on a sharper edge. One morning, Victor was sweeping the stone pathway near the front entrance when Valentina came out for a walk. She was on a phone call, speaking to someone about her fashion label, her voice animated and bright. As she passed Victor, her heel caught slightly on the edge of the pathway where the broom had pushed a small pile of leaves. She didn't fall, she stumbled just for a moment and caught herself instantly, but she turned to Victor with cold eyes. "Can you not do that while I'm walking?" she said sharply, the warmth of her phone call vanishing instantly. "I nearly twisted my ankle. Watch what you're doing." Victor immediately stepped aside. "I'm very sorry, Miss Valentina. I'll finish this later." She looked at him for a moment, truly looked at him, and something crossed her expression. Not sympathy, more like assessment, like she was calculating how much this old man mattered and arriving quickly at the answer. "Just be more careful," she said, and walked on, returning smoothly to her phone call as though nothing had happened. Victor watched her go. The next incident was worse. It was mid-afternoon. Victor had just returned from a routine perimeter check and had stopped near the kitchen entrance for a glass of water. One of the household staff, a young cook named Beto, handed it to him with a friendly smile. Valentina appeared from the corridor with a small entourage of friends she had invited over, 3 women who looked and dressed very much like she did. She saw Victor standing there with his water glass and stopped. Her friends stopped too. Valentina looked at Victor the way someone looks at something they did not expect to find in a room they thought was clean. "What are you doing in this part of the house?" she asked. Victor held up the glass calmly. "Getting some water, miss. It's a warm afternoon." Valentina gave a small, barely concealed look to her friends, the kind of look that holds an entire silent conversation. "The service areas are on the other side," she said. "I'd prefer the service areas to remain service areas." She glanced at Beto as well, including him in the command. Then she led her friends through to the lounge. Beto looked at Victor with wide, apologetic eyes. Victor gave the young cook a small, reassuring nod. He finished his water calmly and went back outside. But inside, his heart was heavy. Not for himself, for Marco. That evening, Nadia Reyes came to the mansion to drop off an urgent file that Marco needed to review before morning. Victor was at the gate when she arrived. She stopped when she saw him. "Sir?" she said, stepping closer. Her eyes widened slowly. I know you, from the other night, near the market district. You were the man who—" "Yes," Victor said warmly, his face breaking into a genuine smile for days. "You have a good memory, my dear, and a good heart." Nadia looked genuinely surprised and a little moved. "I had no idea you worked here. Are you all right? Those men, did they—" "I'm perfectly fine, thanks entirely to you." Nadia smiled, the kind of smile that came from real feeling, not performance. "I'm glad." She held out the file folder. "I just need to leave this for Mr. Marco. I don't want to disturb him." "I'll make sure he gets it." At that moment, Valentina appeared at the top of the front steps, having spotted an unfamiliar car in the driveway. "Who is that?" she called, her voice carrying sharply across the courtyard. "It's Nadia, Marco's executive assistant," Nadia replied, her tone respectful and professional. "Marco's assistant," Valentina repeated, as though filing the information in a category she had already decided on. "He didn't mention you were coming." "It was a last-minute delivery," Nadia said evenly. "I didn't want to trouble him with a call." Valentina turned to Victor. "Why are you standing here talking instead of checking the rest of the perimeter? That's your job. You're not paid to socialize at the gate." Victor said nothing. He gave a small nod and moved aside. But Nadia was not silent. "Excuse me," Nadia said quietly but clearly. "He's a person. He deserves basic courtesy. That's all I'm saying." Valentina stared at her for a long moment. Then her jaw hardened, and to offense. "I beg your pardon?" "He's a person," Nadia said simply. "He deserves basic courtesy. That's all I'm saying." Valentina stared at her for a long moment. "I think you should deliver your file and go," she said finally, her voice low and controlled, "and perhaps remember your position next time you decide to lecture someone in their own home." Then she drove away. Valentina watched her go, Then she turned and went back inside without another word. Victor stood at the gate for a long moment in the quiet. He looked down at the small card in his hand. He was not surprised by what he had seen tonight, but he was grateful, deeply, powerfully grateful, for what he had seen in Nadia Reyes. Victor had been a security guard in his son's house for almost 2 weeks when he overheard the conversation that changed everything. It was a quiet Wednesday morning. The garden was peaceful. Victor was doing a slow walk of the grounds near the far hedgerow when he heard Valentina's voice coming from the other side. She was on the phone, and she was not happy. Victor stopped walking. He did not deliberately hide, but the hedgerow was tall, and she clearly had no idea anyone was on the other side. Her voice was tense and low, fast. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this going, Sasha. He still hasn't proposed officially, and his father is supposed to be coming soon, and I have not even met this man yet, and apparently he's very involved in Marco's life, and—" A pause, while the other person responded. I know, Valentina said, her voice dropping lower. "But the thing is, I'm pregnant, and it's not Marco's. You know it's not Marco's. We've never—" She cut off and lowered her voice further, almost to a whisper. "He's been very traditional about that, waiting. So whoever the father is, it happened before I understood how serious this was going to get with Marco." Victor's breath stopped. He stood completely still behind the hedgerow, not moving a single muscle. "I need to secure this before I start showing," Valentina continued, her voice tight with stress. "Once we're married and I'm pregnant, Marco will naturally assume it's his. It's not ideal, but it's the only way this works now. The alternative is losing everything, and I am not losing everything, Sasha. I refuse." The other person said something. Valentina laughed, but it was a hollow, desperate sound. "Yes, I know, desperate times, but I need this marriage. Do you understand what being married to Marco Salazar means? Do you understand what his family is worth?" A pause. "Exactly," said Valentina. "So I'm going to push for the ring this week, and then we move fast." The sound of her heels clicking across the stone path faded as she moved away. Victor remained where he was for a long time. His hands, he noticed, were very still, the kind of still that comes not from calm, but from a very deep, very controlled place inside a person. He reached slowly into his breast pocket. He pressed record on his phone. Then he made his way quietly back toward the house. That night, when Marco came to check on him, Victor looked at his son for a long moment before speaking. "Marco," he said, "I need you to sit down." Something in his father's voice made Marco comply without question. Victor did not begin immediately. He chose his words with the precision of a man who understood that what he was about to say would split his son's world into a before and an after. "I overheard something today," Victor began, "and I want you to hear it from me before you hear it any other way, because you deserve the truth, and you deserve to hear it with someone who loves you sitting beside you." He played the recording. Marco listened in complete silence. The color drained from his face slowly, like water leaving a glass. His jaw tightened. His eyes, which had been open and present, seemed to go somewhere very far away. When it ended, neither of them spoke for a full minute. Then Marco stood up. He walked to the window. He stood looking out at the dark garden for a long time. "I loved her," he said. His voice was very quiet, very flat. "I know," said Victor. "I believed she loved me." "I know." "She was going to—" Marco stopped. He pressed his fist against the window frame. "She was going to let me raise another man's child thinking it was mine." "Yes," said Victor. Silence.
How do you face something like this? Marco asked, and for a moment he sounded exactly like the 7-year-old boy who had stood in a doorway asking why his mother was sleeping. Victor walked to his son. He placed a hand on his back, firm and steady. "The same way we face everything," Victor said, "together and with the truth in front of us instead of behind us."
The next morning, Marco asked Valentina to join him in the main living room. He said it simply and calmly. His face gave nothing away. Valentina came downstairs looking polished as always. She sat across from Marco with a relaxed smile, unaware that anything was different. Victor stood near the doorway in his security uniform. Valentina barely registered his presence. "I want to talk to you about something important," Marco said. His voice was steady, professional almost, like he was running a board meeting. "Of course," Valentina said, crossing her legs and giving him her full attention. "What is it?" "I want to ask you directly," Marco said. "Is there anything you need to tell me? About us, about your life, about anything at all that might be relevant to the future we've been discussing?" Valentina held his gaze. She was very good. Her expression stayed perfectly warm and open. "I can't think of anything, Marco." "Why? Has something happened?" "Yes," Marco said. He nodded toward Victor. Victor glanced at the old man in the security uniform, mildly annoyed that he was being included in this conversation. Then Victor stepped forward and said clearly and calmly, "My name is not Victor Ruiz. I am Victor Salazar, Marco's father." The silence that followed was total. Valentina's face went through several things in the space of 2 seconds. Confusion, then disbelief, then the dawning of something cold and awful. "What?" she whispered. "I came here to understand who you truly are, not who you present yourself to be at events and dinners. Who you are when you believe no one important is watching." He paused, and I found out more than I expected. He placed his phone on the table. He pressed play. Valentina's own voice filled the room. Her words about the pregnancy, about securing the marriage, about what being married to Marco Salazar was worth. She reached forward and tried to push the phone away. "Stop it," she said, her voice cracked. "Stop it, that's not... I was stressed. I was talking to a friend. It's not what it..." Marco said one word, but the way he said it stopped her completely. She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears that she could not fully control. "I'm sorry," she said, and for one moment she might have been. "Marco, I'm sorry. I panicked. I was scared. I do care about you." "You were going to let me believe a child was mine," Marco said. His voice did not rise. It just became very precise. "You were going to build a life with me on top of a lie, and you would have kept that lie forever." "I didn't know what else to do." "You could have told me the truth," Marco said simply. "That would have been the other option." Valentina went quiet. Marco stood. He was not shaking. He was not crying. He had passed through the worst of it in the dark room with his father the night before, and now he was simply clear. "I want you to leave," Marco said. "I'll have the staff help you with your luggage, and I'd like this to be done quietly and respectfully. I have no desire to cause you further harm, but this is finished." Valentina looked at Victor one last time. Her expression was impossible to read. Shame, maybe, or something close to it. Then she looked away. She stood, and she left. When the front door closed, the house was very quiet. Marco stood in the middle of the room for a moment. Then he sat back down. "Papa," he said, his voice tired. "I know," Marco said. He leaned back and closed his eyes. "What do I do now?" "Now," Victor said. "Now you rest, and then you look at what's truly in front of you." He let a small pause settle. "And who?" In the weeks that followed, Marco threw himself back into work. It was the only thing that kept the pain from sitting too heavily on his chest. Nadia noticed the change in him immediately, as she noticed everything. She did not ask, she did not push, but she made small adjustments to their working arrangement, scheduling fewer back-to-back meetings, ensuring he had breaks built into the day, appearing quietly with a good cup of coffee when the afternoon grew long and heavy. One morning, Marco arrived at the office earlier than usual to find that Nadia had already been there for over an hour, reorganizing a complex project timeline that had been causing the whole team stress for weeks. She had solved it overnight, on her own time, leaving a clean summary on his desk. Marco stood at the door of her office for a moment, watching her work. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was focused completely, her expression serious, professional, utterly absorbed in what she was doing. He thought about what his father had said. Sometimes the right person is already in your life. You just need to see them for who they are. He walked to her door and knocked lightly. Nadia looked up. "Good morning, Mr. Marco. You're in early." "So are you," he said. He gestured to the documents on her desk. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she said simply. "The team was stuck. It was a solvable problem." "Nadia," he said, and then stopped. He wasn't entirely sure what he was about to say. She waited, her expression open and patient. "Would you like to have lunch with me today? Not a working lunch, just lunch." Something shifted in Nadia's expression, something quiet and careful and real. "I'd like that," she said. Lunch became 2 lunches, then a walk after work, then an evening at a small restaurant where Marco wore no watch that cost more than a car, and Nadia wore a simple blue dress that she had probably owned for years, and they talked for 4 hours without noticing the time. She was funny, genuinely funny, not the kind of funny that performs itself. She was curious about everything. She asked him real questions, not about his wealth or his business strategies, but about what he thought about when he couldn't sleep, and what he wished he had learned earlier, and whether he thought his father was the bravest person he'd ever known. "Without question," Marco had said, and he had meant it completely. When he walked her to her car that evening and she said goodnight, he stood watching until the taillights disappeared. And something that had been tight and broken in his chest for weeks loosened slightly. He called Victor on the way home. "Papa," he said, "I had dinner with Nadia tonight." There was a pause, and then Victor said, "Tell me everything." And Marco did. Victor was glad, but he was also in a very quiet corner of himself, still careful. He loved his son, and he knew that hearts in pain could sometimes leap toward warmth and mistake it for safety. He needed to know that Nadia was not simply the right person at the right moment. He needed to know she was genuinely, truly right. He told Marco this, honestly. "What are you suggesting?" Marco asked. "A test, a different kind this time. No disguise, no deception, just truth. Hard truth, and we watch what she does with it." Marco was quiet for a moment. "What kind of hard truth?" "You tell her the business has collapsed, a bad investment, everything gone, the mansion seized, you're starting from zero, and then you see if she stays, and how she stays." Marco exhaled. "Papa, she deserves better than being tested." "Everyone who loves someone truly deserves to have that love tested and proven," Victor said simply. "When you see that her love holds in the dark, you will be able to love her in the light without any shadow of doubt, and she will never have to wonder why you are sometimes hesitant or afraid, because you will not be afraid anymore." Marco was silent for a long time. Then, "If I do this and she proves herself, I tell her everything, immediately, no more lies after that." "Agreed," Victor said at once. The following week, Marco sat across from Nadia with a face carefully arranged into something exhausted and defeated. I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I'm not telling you because I want anything from you. I'm telling you because you're someone I trust, and you're going to find out soon anyway. He paused. The company is over. A major investment went completely wrong. The losses are catastrophic. I've had to begin liquidation. I'm losing the mansion, the assets, everything. We'll be keeping a skeleton crew on as long as possible. But, Marco, Nadia said quietly. He stopped. I'm sorry, she said. Not the automatic kind of sorry, the real kind, the kind that comes behind the eyes. That must be absolutely devastating. It is, he said. She was quiet for a moment. What do you need right now? Today, this week, what do you actually need? He looked at her. I don't know. Okay, then let's figure it out. Do you have somewhere to stay while the transition happens? I'll manage. You can stay with my parents' spare room. They'd be glad to have you. No conditions, no awkwardness, just a roof. Marco went very still inside. He had offered a man with nothing a spare room at her family's home. He kept his face steady. You would do that? He said. Of course, she said, looking slightly puzzled that he was surprised. You'd do the same for me. She helped him think through a plan that afternoon. Quiet, practical, clear-headed. She looked into job retraining programs she could recommend for the team members who would be let go. She contacted 2 of her former professors about consulting opportunities. She did all of this on her own initiative, without being asked, and she never, not once, mentioned what losing her own job meant for her. That evening, Marco sat in his car outside the office for 20 minutes before driving home. He felt like a fraud. He felt like he didn't deserve what he had just witnessed. He called Victor. She offered me her parents' spare room, he said, his voice slightly unsteady. Papa, she offered me her parents' spare room. Victor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was very gentle. That's who she is, Marco. That's exactly who she is. 2 days later, Marco told Nadia the truth. He sat her down in the same small cafe where they had first had lunch. He ordered 2 coffees, and then he looked at her directly. I lied to you, he said. The company hasn't collapsed. Everything I told you, the losses, the mansion, the liquidation, none of it is real. I made it up. Nadia stared at him. I made it up, he repeated, because I was afraid, because the last woman I was going to build a life with turned out to be lying to me about something enormous, and when she was gone, I realized I didn't know how to trust anyone anymore. And then I started spending time with you, and something happened in me that I haven't felt in a very long time, and I was afraid of that too. He kept her gaze steadily. I tested you, and I'm ashamed of it, but I needed you to know immediately because I cannot begin anything with you on a false foundation, and because you deserved the truth the moment I knew it was safe to give it. The silence stretched for a long time. Nadia looked down at her coffee. Her face was unreadable. When she looked up, her eyes were bright, not tears exactly, with something more complicated. I understand why you did it. I don't like that you did it, but I understand it. I know I don't deserve. Let me finish, she said. Marco went quiet. When you told me the business had collapsed, my first thought was not about my job or my salary. My first thought was, he must be completely overwhelmed, and who is making sure he eats dinner? She paused. That was my first thought, Marco, and I don't know what that means to you, but to me, it means that what I feel for you isn't about what you have, it's about who you are when things get hard. Marco was absolutely still. Don't test me again, Nadia said, quietly but clearly. I understand why this one happened, but don't do it again. Never. I promise you, never again." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she picked up her coffee. "Good," she said. "Now, tell me about your father, the real story, because I have a feeling he was involved in all of this." Marco laughed. It was the first real laugh he had produced in weeks. "Oh, he was very involved." "I'd like to meet him." Marco said, "He already knows you," and smiled. Her eyes went wide, then wider. "The security guard." "The security guard," Marco confirmed. For a moment, she was stunned. Then a slow, disbelieving smile spread across her face. She covered her mouth with her hand. "He was that whole time? At the gate?" "His name is Victor Salazar, and he thinks you are the finest person he has met in a very long time, which, from my father, is not a small thing." Nadia looked at him. Her eyes were shining now. "He saved my life," she said quietly. "That night near the market, I was the one who helped him, but without knowing it, he saved mine too, because whatever is happening between us started because of him." Victor met Nadia officially the following weekend. Marco had arranged a quiet dinner at the family home, not the mansion, but the original house where Victor still lived. The modest, comfortable house that smelled of old wood and fresh bread and decades of a life well lived. Nadia arrived with flowers for Victor in a warm handshake that he immediately upgraded to a hug. "You didn't have to bring anything," Victor told her. "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." Dinner was simple and long and full of real conversation. Victor asked Nadia about her parents, her childhood, her dreams. She asked him about his courier bicycle and the tin box of coins. He laughed, a deep, genuine sound that filled the small dining room. "You told Marco about the tin box?" he said. "He tells me everything," Nadia said. "He's very proud of you." Victor looked at Marco across the table. Marco was watching them both with an expression that was quiet and full and deeply settled. After dinner, while Nadia was helping Victor clear the table, he had tried to stop her, and she had simply continued, talking cheerfully and ignoring his protests. Marco came to stand beside his father. "Papa?" he said quietly. Victor looked at him. "I know," Marco said simply. Victor placed a hand briefly on his son's shoulder. He did not need to say anything more. Later that evening, after Victor had excused himself to sit in his favorite chair in the study, Marco and Nadia stood together on the small back porch. The night was cool and clear. The city hummed softly in the distance. Marco turned to Nadia. He had been thinking about how to do this for days. He had imagined elaborate scenarios, grand gestures, speeches. But standing here, with her, in the ordinary quiet of his father's garden, none of that felt right. None of it was them. "Nadia," he said. Just that. Just her name. She turned and looked at him. He reached into his jacket pocket and brought out a ring. Not the enormous diamond he had bought for Valentina. Something different. Something his mother had left behind. A simple, elegant band with a single stone, handed to him by Victor the night before, with a look that said everything. "My mother wore this," Marco said. "My father kept it for years. He said he was keeping it for the right moment." He looked at her. "Nadia, you walked a stranger to safety in the dark. You offered a man you thought had nothing a room in your parents' home. You stood up for an old security guard who turned out to be my father, and when I told you my world had fallen apart, your first thought was whether I had eaten dinner." Nadia's breath had gone very still. "I'm not asking you because you passed any test. I'm asking you because you are the first person in my life, besides my father, who has made me feel like being known completely is safe." He paused. "Will you marry me?" She looked at the ring. She looked at him. "Yes," she said, simply.
surely, like she had known the answer for a long time. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him close, and behind the glass of the study window, Victor watched them, his face full of a happiness so deep and so complete that it left no room for anything else. He sat back in his chair. He thought of Rosa. He thought of the tin box under a narrow bed, of a bicycle, an empty kitchen, and a 7-year-old boy at a doorway. He thought of every hard year and every quiet victory, and every night he had sat alone and wondered whether it would ever be enough. And he thought, yes, it was enough. It had always been going to be enough. "Thank you, Rosa," he whispered to the quiet room. Outside, his son laughed, and the sound carried all the way through the glass.
The wedding of Marco Salazar and Nadia Reyes was not the grandest event the city had ever seen. Marco had wanted something spectacular. Nadia had gently steered them toward something real. And so it was held in a garden, not the mansion's formal garden, but a beautiful public garden in the part of the city where Nadia had grown up. White lights were strung between old trees, long tables were filled with food that Nadia's mother and aunts had helped prepare. The music was live and joyful. Nadia's parents, quiet, proud, slightly overwhelmed, sat in the front row, beside Victor. Victor shook Nadia's father's hand before the ceremony. "You raised an extraordinary person," he said. Her father looked at him for a moment, then said, "So did you." When Nadia walked down the aisle, she wore a dress that was elegant and simple. She carried wildflowers. She was smiling so fully and so freely that several guests who did not even know her well found themselves emotional for reasons they could not entirely explain. Marco stood at the end of the aisle and watched her walk toward him, and he did not try to manage his expression at all. He let everything he felt show completely, because she had taught him that being seen was not something to be afraid of. Victor stood to give the blessing before the vows. He spoke slowly and without notes. "I have been fortunate in my life," he said. "I was born with very little and worked my way to more than I ever imagined. But I have learned again and again that the only wealth that truly sustains a person is found in the people beside them, in loyalty, in honesty, in the willingness to stay, especially when it would be easier to go." He looked at Nadia. "My daughter," he said, and she looked up immediately, her eyes full. "Thank you for staying." There was not a dry eye in the garden. After the ceremony, as the evening wound into music and laughter and dancing, Victor found a quiet bench near the edge of the lights. He sat and watched everything: the spinning, the joy, the noise of people who were happy and unafraid to show it. Nadia found him there an hour later. She sat beside him without asking. She did not say anything at first. She just sat, the way someone sits when they are exactly where they are supposed to be. "Papa," she said, at last, using the word naturally, the way she had begun to use it in recent weeks. Victor said. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you did, even the parts I didn't know about until later, especially those parts." Victor looked at her for a moment. Then he patted her hand. "You did the hard part. All I did was watch." She leaned her head very briefly against his shoulder. He did not move. Across the garden, Marco caught his father's eye over the heads of the dancing crowd. He raised his glass just slightly. Victor raised a hand in return. And in that moment, everything that had ever been broken, every hard year, every sacrifice, every lonely night, was repaid in full. Not because everything had gone perfectly, but because what remained after all of it was real, and real things last.